Yeah, so I think we will start now. I welcome you in the name of our FoodSHIFT consortium to our first public webinar about FoodSHIFT. In a few words, we are a European project, a consortium from about more than 100 people, not only researchers, but as well people from the cities, regions. And we are trying to empower citizens to shift to European food system to a low carbon, circular and plant-based future. And we are happy to invite you today to reflect on city region perspectives on providing vulnerable people with food. This crisis has seen city regions across the world respond to the emergency in a number of ways, with some local initiatives truly standing out. So the latter have the potential to inform other urban communities on how local and national governments and the public sector can ensure the most vulnerable have access to food, including those on very low income and in isolation. So this webinar intends to present the city region responses to the crisis, inviting all participants to address the key aspects of establishing solidarity and citizen-driven initiatives to support resilience in local food systems. We have set some objectives for our webinar. The first is learning from each other and learning especially from city regions and broader agglomerations or urban regions about new ways of providing vulnerable people with food during the crisis. So this feedback from some experiences. Then we want to share views about how to start and explicitly discussing the role of the farmers, of the interaction with existing assistance organizations, charity organizations, and the interaction between them and new networks that aim at assisting those vulnerable people. And then we want to gain in capacities to build resilience in our food accelerator labs and discuss the empowerment of citizens in a time of crisis and post-crisis changes. So a few tips before beginning the discussion. For you all to know that we record this session and we intend to publish it on our website after. You are more than invited to tweet at FoodSHIFT 2030 or hashtag FoodSHIFT 2030. For the questions, we expect you to use only the Q&A section and to address your technical issues in the chat. So I will now invite Christian Bug Eriksson, our coordinator, to present introducing our project and this webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dominique, for the welcome and the introduction to this very first webinar for the FoodSHIFT 2030 project. So welcome to all of you. So I'd like to set a little bit more of the context of the webinar by briefly introducing the project. So the FoodSHIFT 2030 project is a new Horizon 2020 project that started in January 2020, and it will run until the end of 2023. So as Dominique just mentioned, the objectives of the project are to foster this food system transition towards a low carbon circular future, including a shift to less meat and more plant-based diets. We are taking departure in the city region food system, and we have a clear vision also to strengthen the urban-rural cohesion. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to create impact? We are going to create impact by supporting the transformative power of the citizens already engaged in developing sustainable and innovative food system solutions. And we aim to support this transformative power by creating the best framework and an efficient mechanism for maturing, combining, upscaling and multiplying existing food system innovations. This mechanism we are implementing by establishing and operationalizing 9 citizen-driven FoodSHIFT Accelerator labs, and then subsequently 27 FoodSHIFT Enabler labs across Europe. And an important thing about the FoodSHIFT project is that we have a strong emphasis on citizen empowerment. So throughout the project, great care will be taken to empower citizens, also including vulnerable groups. We want to make it easier for everyone to make informed decisions about their food consumption. And we want to empower the citizens to engage in food-related grassroots movements and NGOs. We want to empower citizens to build their own food startups and find jobs in the food sector. And we also want to empower citizens to influence the way their food is produced and distributed within their city regions. Now, the FoodSHIFT project is about transforming our food system. And with COVID-19, it has become more evident that we urgently need such a food system transition. We need a food system transformation in order to be able to address the short, the medium, and the long-term impacts of COVID-19. So we have seen in the short term, we have seen huge impacts of COVID-19 for everyone involved in producing, distributing, and preparing food in both the private and public sector. We have seen workers losing their jobs, and we have seen companies suffering from financial losses and bankruptcies. So in the medium term, we have also seen some shortages of food supply, not for all food commodities and not in all regions, but for some food commodities in some regions. And we have also seen some examples of less healthy food commodities with long shelf life and low quality being easier to get access to than healthy and fresh food commodities of high quality. So in the long term, when COVID-19 is no longer an acute problem because maybe an effective vaccine has been developed or the virus has mutated into a less aggressive form, COVID-19 will for sure still continue to have a huge impact on our economy. And this will in turn also have a significant impact on how our food system will evolve in the future. So therefore, really the time is now. In order to address these short, medium, and long-term impacts of COVID-19, we need, of course, to respond with adaptation and we need to recover with mitigation, but we also need to start now transforming and rebuilding our food system so that we become better prepared for both multiple waves of COVID-19 as well as other similar or even more severe crises in the future. So in order to contribute with solutions to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the food system, we have established a COVID-19 task force in the FoodSHIFT 2030 project. And Dirk Washer from SUS Metro, he is our innovation manager. He's also leading the COVID-19 task force. He will now tell you a little bit more about our FoodSHIFT Accelerator labs and how they are addressing COVID-19. So over to you, Dirk.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Dominique, for introducing this webinar. And hello to everyone. If maybe Stephanie or Dominique can open my few slides. I'd like to talk about the Food Accelerator Labs, which are the term which we have coined for this project, because it's FAL and the acceleration and the work on the concrete innovation cases, because the project is revolving around innovation, innovation at different levels of product, of process, of social issues, and of policy development. So not a technologically driven innovation, but a broad sense of innovation. And these labs, Christian mentioned them, we have 9. I will show them in a moment. They are here with this abbreviation. On the left side and on the right side, we do have the work packages. And but the central role of each FoodSHIFT Accelerator Lab, FAL, is clear here. We have a staffing which is equal to each of the files. It consists of a lab host, a lab assistant, a lab leader, And the lab assistant is very much engaged and in contact with the work package on the research dimension. The lab host is there to really make sure that the regional authorities and stakeholders are basically geared towards providing input and to really make sure they are well established, and the lab leader surveys and guides the whole process. So this is equal to all of them, and the key issue is to identify and work on food system innovation cases, which we have already identified before. Can you please go to the next slide? Here is an overview on these 9 labs. Athens, Avignon, Barcelona, Bari in Italy, Barcelona, Brasov in Romania, Copenhagen in Denmark, Oostende, Belgium, and Wrocław in Poland. And you see the different innovation focus areas on the right side. These are basically topics which have been identified as key activity spaces and issues at each level of at each lab. So they differ, but they also combine certain things. But there is an overarching focus area, 1 or 2 at least, per lab. And you see the titles for Athens, for example, Open School Lab, schools as sites for food experience, Avignon, regional lunch for all, public procurement, very important, Barcelona, food tech, solutions for the production in future cities, Bari, back to the land, sustainable land use with strategies for the hinterland, Berlin, food life centers and basically agricultural park and hub in the center of Berlin, Brasov, interactive food lab with integrating traditional and local production. Then Copenhagen, kitchen of tomorrow, very much into procurement and professional kitchen establishment. Oostende is in charge of an agricultural park as a main reference, and Wrocław, accessible food gardens, strengthening the local food community in community gardening and local food systems. So this is a flight over this, and for this we have identified at each lab level already 4, 5, 6 partners with concrete innovation cases. This means things which have been developed as innovation-oriented, basically change makers, and these are part of the project. And since we have the COVID-19 impact, please the next slide, we have also received, of course, background information to what's happening at these labs right now. And as Christian has mentioned, there has been a quite ad hoc and spontaneous reaction of many of the lab leaders and hosts towards the new situation. So that meant, for example, in Athens, that the school gardening really had stopped. And that was a problem. Of course, there is video, basically use of information sharing, but that's not the same of getting your hands dirty in the garden. And at the same time, for seniors, there has been much more support now since they were not able or not advised to go to supermarkets. In Avignon, Central Kitchen is now also providing 50% more food also for the elderly. So a clear shift towards these vulnerable groups we could witness at this stage. Barcelona, for example, has really improved or given attention to the hospital sector for delivering more healthy meals and even producing masks, protection masks as we all need them now, with 3D printing facilities, which is not directly into the food, but shows also the flexibility of our partners to react to the crisis. Bari had made a survey among Mediterranean countries regarding what COVID-19 really, what effects it had. In Berlin, there is now a change from producing, the normal beer consumption as an innovation case towards hand sanitizers for local pharmacy in order to just cope with the demand. Brasov is very strong on food and hospitality sector and looks and realize that this is among the most affected sectors in the C-19 crisis where they are dealing with. In Copenhagen, public kitchens are helping hospitals now in elderly homes, and home delivery services for the elder are of central significance there. Oostende have a prepared meal home delivery scheme developed for elderly people. and Rocklove during this crisis developed new solutions and identified new solutions, for example, touchless food fair. So this shows you that these our basically sensors, if you want, so sensors in the real world are these labs and these groups and stakeholders, and that they have already been largely affected and reactive to the crisis. So this is basically the starting point also of this webinar, to look how this can be developed further and what recommendations and remedies this can have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for this nice presentation. We will now have two.
And, at the same time, for seniors, there has been much more support now since they were not able or not advised to go to supermarkets. In Avignon, Central Kitchen is now also providing 50% more food also for the elderly. So a clear shift towards these vulnerable groups we could witness at this stage. Barcelona, for example, has really improved or given attention to the hospital sector for delivering more healthy meals and even producing masks, protection masks as we all need them now, with 3D printing facilities, which is not directly into the food, but shows also the flexibility of our partners to react to the crisis. Bari had made a survey among Mediterranean countries regarding what COVID-19 really, what effects it had. In Berlin, there is now a change from producing, the normal beer consumption as an innovation case towards hand sanitizers for local pharmacy in order to just cope with the demand. Brasov is very strong on food and hospitality sector, and looks and realize that this is among the most affected sectors in the C-19 crisis where they are dealing with. In Copenhagen, public kitchens are helping hospitals now in elderly homes, and home delivery services for the elder are of central significance there. Oostende have a prepared meal home delivery scheme developed for elderly people, and Rocklove during this crisis developed new solutions and identified new solutions, for example, touchless food fair. So this shows you that these our basically sensors, if you want, so sensors in the real world are these labs and these groups and stakeholders, and that they have already been largely affected and reactive to the crisis. So this is basically the starting point also of this webinar, to look how this can be developed further and what recommendations and remedies this can have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for this nice presentation. We will now have two labs. We will have two labs sharing experience. So the first will be Oostende. May I ask Ewoud to open the video when I am running, to open his camera? Yeah, Ewoud.
Hello, everybody.
We can introduce you maybe shortly.
Okay, I'm Ewoud. I work for the city of Oostende in Belgium for the social services, and I'm now already 3 years coordinator for Antenne. And Antenne, it's a kind of social grocer for poor people. Can come here for 6 months. And I made a short, it's like a movie presentation where I explain how we worked before in Antenne and what's changed during the COVID crisis. Antenne is a social grocery. That means a grocery shop for poor people where they can buy basic food like flour, milk, coffee at low prices because they pay a small solidarity cost for the food residues, like the food waste. And therefore they pay like 10 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents or €1. But Antenne is also much more than just a shop. It's a meeting point for the community. It is a place where citizens can cook together and create new meals out of food waste. We make soup for the shop and the meeting point. We make meals also for the homeless people. It is also a place where we organize training sessions and groups work. And we have a core team of 35 volunteers for the day-to-day work. So next to the shop, we create a place where a variety of people from rich to poor find new social contacts, get inspired, find meaningful activities, and also learn to know their own community. For Antenne, we had to go from the daily busy place to a quiet meeting point, only being opened for customers of the social grocery store. We faced many challenges. The supermarkets had less food waste on offer because of the panic buying behavior of customers at the start of the crisis. Problem to fill our own basic food stock, for instance toilet paper, became scarce. Many of our visitors had no place to go anymore during the day. We had to stop activities in our kitchen with the volunteers because of COVID-19 measures. So now food rescued, no meals prepared. Also, the other volunteers had to stop of our own safety policy. We work with a lot of people, over more than 60, and they were considered a group at risk. The first day after the lockdown, we closed Antenne for 1 day and discussed with the team how we would organize upcoming months. In the first place, we wanted to reopen the social grocer as quickly as possible. We choose to only open the social grocer shop and work with appointments. The cafe and meeting points remained closed. 3 days a week we were open from 9 until 5:30. Every 10 minutes we made a new appointment for each customer. We started to take actions on different fronts. Communication. We contact all of our existing 350 customers by phone, in total 1,090 persons. And we asked them how they were doing, what their needs were, and explained we were still open, but we would work with appointments. In this way, we quickly had a full and efficient schedule with appointments for customers. Thanks to this system, we had time to actually talk with the people. We called all the food charity partners in our community. We asked them if they needed any support, if they needed material, if they stayed open, and if new people could still come for access to food. We made a list of food charity organizations and did a quick screening of procedure how people can gain access to food organizations. The city of Oostende started an emergency phone number for all questions. Citizens who needed access to food could also call this number. Also, we put up information panels on the doors of closed food charity organizations. Taking all these actions, we create a new protocol to provide access to food for people in need. We also create more food. We contact the food bank, which is organized at the regional level, and ask if we could work together to create more food. The city of Oostende went to the central pickup point 50 kilometers away on a weekly basis to pick up dry food from the food bank. As a next step, we need to find storage. We ask permission the city to use an empty big place, like a sports place or a big place for youth activities, where we could stock the food and organize the pickup from the different food charity organizations. We needed a large place where the social distancing rules could be applied. In this way we could upscale larger amounts of food that we pick up from supermarkets and food factories. Freezing was needed for meat products. We could use the freezer of La Cour, a care home for elderly, to stock the big amounts of meat. Several service clubs provided money to different organizations. We created a central point for them. This person would weekly make an inventory of the need for food in each food charity point and made a list to buy for all the organizations together. Each week, another service club provided a donation. During 2 months, we weekly could buy what we needed. Staff. Because of Corona, we had to stop working with our volunteers, so we needed extra helpers. We asked in the city staff who had time and who was preparing to support us during the crisis. After 2 weeks, we had a new group of colleagues who were temporarily out of work because of COVID-19, and with this big force of professionals, we had more time to create new activities like a mobile grocery for people in need and the temporary food distribution platform. After a few weeks, we noticed that some of the volunteers who are active in food charity organizations were getting tired, especially the cooking teams who was making daily meals for pickup. We asked to our own volunteers who wanted to support. As a result, now we have several cooking teams. Food is a basic need. Lots of shops closed during COVID, but all food supplies stayed open. During the crisis, it was important to create a stable system. Otherwise, I think you create more panic. Also, for me, it's important always having a stable social service, especially for the most vulnerable people and for the organizations of food charity. If this collapses, there is no more trust from the people in the supporting mechanism of the city, and they feel totally lost. A lot of volunteers, older people, stayed active. They kept on working hard to help, while some official social services closed. The value and the solidarity in those volunteering organizations is very important. The city does everything in its power to support those citizens' solidarity organizations. We, Antenne, had the luxury of being able to work with professional social workers. Because of the COVID measures, we had to stop working with our volunteer group. The other food charity organizations who stayed open were organizations only working with volunteers. Most of them are over 65. As a city, we need to recognize and appreciate their work by listening, by giving them a voice. When you gain their trust and give them all the support, logistic, communication, food you can, then lots of beautiful collaborations are possible. This kind of coordination and cooperation between food charity organizations is a triple win-win-win situation. The first win is communication. A more structural poverty policy by, for example, giving information about social rights, about where to go to, or who to call for help. Second win is less food waste. For example, we, Antenne, we had a lot of bread, but other food charity, they have no bread, so you can divide it. Third win, better and stronger story to all bring to the donators. For example, the supermarkets, but also service clubs, local governments. Next step is creating a network of food charity organizations where we learn from each other, where we share information and think about how to use food as a tool for poverty reduction. L'union fait la force. Together we are strong. We want that this new strong collaboration can continue. One central number and procedure to get access to food for all. It needs to be simple for all people and needs to find a way. Also, we want to start up a food distribution platform where we work on 3 goals. Train people who have a distance to the regular labor market and logistic processes. Also biking systems. Centralize and distribute the food waste from the region. If we have more knowledge of this kind of food waste, next step can be how to create new food with it. More support to the local food charity organization. More trust and collaboration between the different social organizations. Food connects people and hopefully also organizations. If a new crisis pops up, we need simple and clear communication, a good logistic distribution system, and a strong collaboration between governments, volunteers, and professionals. Also, we need to create platforms or structures for people who want to help. As government, we can create it safe and with the needed protection. People want to participate by bringing groceries to older people, cooking, helping organizations, food charity. Professionals need to create and support these platforms. People are in need of a meaningful life and solidarity, especially in these times. It will make us less afraid and less selfish.
Effectivement, il faut comprendre que le périmètre de la ville d'Avignon, c'est donc une cuisine centrale qui produit et qui distribue des repas essentiellement dans le milieu scolaire, donc scolaire de 3 ans à 10 ans, donc 4 à 5 600 repas chaque jour. Mais nous avons aussi d'autres... Effectivement, il faut comprendre que le périmètre de la ville d'Avignon, c'est donc une cuisine centrale qui produit et qui distribue des repas essentiellement dans le milieu scolaire, donc scolaire de 3 ans à 10 ans, donc 4 à 5 600 repas chaque jour. Mais nous avons aussi d'autres convives, puisque nous nourrissons aussi des personnes âgées en portage de repas à domicile, 90 à 120 personnes, ainsi que 2 restaurants d'accueil personnes âgées à vocation sociale et en complément pour les périodes de vacances et sur les mercredis, jours chômés scolaires, nous avons des centres de loisirs avec 150 à 900 couverts. Donc la cuisine centrale est une cuisine centrale qui se fournit auprès d'agriculteurs et producteurs et transformateurs locaux pour ce qui est disponible dans des proportions qui varient de 15 à 35% pour ce qui est de l'approvisionnement local et ce en fonction de la saisonnalité et aussi avec un pourcentage de produits en bio de 20 à 25%. Encore un rappel important, la cuisine centrale d'Avignon est une cuisine centrale qui avait été déléguée à un prestataire privé durant 16 années et sur la décision politique de la nouvelle municipalité et sous l'impulsion de Madame Cécilel, maire d'Avignon, en 2014, la décision a été faite de reprendre la gestion directe de cette restauration pour la ville d'Avignon. Voilà.
Voilà, ça c'est le cadre un petit peu de l'activité. Maintenant, par rapport à cette période de crise sanitaire qu'on a connue, comment tout ça, ça a dû beaucoup impacter, on peut deviner que ça a impacté vos activités. Donc, est-ce que vous pouvez nous faire un retour d'expérience sur cette crise et la manière dont vous avez pris en main le changement énorme qui s'est produit avec la fermeture des écoles?
Alors, effectivement, ça a été sur des directives nationales et même internationales. Chaque pays a fait le choix d'adopter des mesures littéralement de rétention des populations avec des mises en confinement, ce qui pour chaque ville s'est traduit par la fermeture de l'ensemble des écoles, la fermeture de tout ce qui est aussi restauration commerciale, et la mise en sécurité ou des actions pour mettre en sécurité les personnes les plus fragiles. Donc, on pense aux personnes âgées notamment, aux personnes les plus démunies. Donc, ces mesures se sont traduites par la ville d'Avignon et pour la cuisine centrale. D'abord, par un constat amer, c'est que notre activité a baissé de 85%. C'est-à-dire que sur ce que l'on avait donné en présentation au départ, eh bien, notre activité a baissé de 85%. Parallèlement à ça, on s'est aperçu avec la crise que de nouveaux besoins émergeaient. Et notamment, je pense au portage de repas à domicile pour les personnes âgées, puisque en quelques 5 jours, nous avons été obligés de faire face à un doublement de la demande, sachant que ce doublement de la demande était fait parce que, encore une fois, l'échelon politique local, donc la municipalité et Madame le maire, ont demandé à ce qu'une campagne d'information soit faite sur le maintien et le soutien à ces populations, chose qui s'est traduite par effectivement une hausse des effectifs dans ce domaine. Parallèlement à ça, il fallait aussi assurer une certaine sérénité pour le personnel hospitalier, et notamment des centres hospitaliers de la ville. Et donc, encore une fois, la mairie a fait le choix de mettre en place un service minimum d'accueil, une forme, je dirais, d'accueil scolaire avec restauration pour les enfants du personnel soignant qui étaient réquisitionnés et qui mettaient en œuvre tout ce qui était mesures de soins et de protection pour l'organisation face à la pandémie. Une troisième mission est née. C'est une mission qui avait pour charge la prise en compte de tous les personnes les plus démunies et notamment les personnes sans domicile fixe, présentes sur la ville d'Avignon. Donc, la ville d'Avignon a mis à disposition de la Croix-Rouge française un gymnase qui a été transformé en dortoir avec point d'accueil pour petit déjeuner, repas de midi et repas du soir, et qui était de fait fourni par la cuisine centrale. Donc, toutes ces actions, je veux dire, on a été obligé de les mener avec toutefois 2 facteurs essentiels, la mise en sécurité de notre propre personnel et l'assurance de la continuité de service. Ce qui fait que même avant la décision du confinement au niveau national, puisque le point zéro était dépassé à mon sens, j'ai fait une proposition qui a été retenue, c'était de diviser en 3 l'équipe et de mettre en confinement 2 équipes en sécurité et une seule équipe au travail, vu que nous tournions sur, comme je vous le disais, 85% de baisse d'activité, et de façon à avoir toutes les certitudes en cas d'une contamination au sein de l'équipe qui travaillait. Donc ça, c'est tout ce qui a été mis en place en termes de mesures. Après, on a eu aussi la volonté de poursuivre avec une alimentation de qualité. Parce que si les villes ont été impactées, il faut savoir que toute l'activité commerciale et de production et agro-industrielle en France s'est mise dans un régime, dans un mode, je dirais, restreint. Ils ont travaillé en mode dégradé, et donc ça s'est traduit par des éventuelles ruptures pour certains, etc., etc. La particularité de la période fait que l'ensemble des producteurs et transformateurs locaux étaient très impactés. Et là, en plus, on rentrait dans la saison printanière avec le développement de tout ce qui était arrivé des cultures en maturité, etc., etc. Et il fallait que la ville réfléchisse pour pouvoir soutenir ensuite cette agriculture.
De maintenir les commandes et le lien, le contact avec nos partenaires sur l'approvisionnement direct auprès des producteurs locaux. Donc, du coup, ce n'était pas évident de trouver une petite fenêtre de tir et d'adapter des actions en ce sens-là. Mais ça a quand même été fait au sein de la ville, puisqu'il y a eu du coup des idées nouvelles qui ont émergé, puisqu'il fallait réinventer quelque chose. Et notamment le fait de privilégier des produits qu'habituellement Hugues et l'équipe de la cuisine centrale n'auraient pas pu utiliser en termes de transformation. Donc, un exemple très concret, par exemple, des épinards frais, qui d'habitude sont impossibles à cuisiner en cuisine centrale en termes de volume et de quantité de travail, là, étaient très adaptés à un nombre de repas bien réduit, et notamment aux repas pour les personnes âgées. Donc là, ça a pu se faire et ça a occasionné une commande auprès d'un producteur local qui, justement, avait beaucoup de jeunes pousses d'épinards à écouler du fait des demandes autres qui avaient également baissé. Donc ça, c'est un bon exemple. Et ensuite, on peut souligner aussi un autre exemple, donc qui est un petit peu, on va dire, parallèle de l'activité de la cuisine centrale, mais qui est lié à l'activité municipale aussi, enfin la décision municipale. C'est le fait que la municipalité a engagé une enveloppe donc hebdomadaire d'un montant de plusieurs milliers d'euros pour lancer des achats auprès de producteurs locaux pour alimenter en produits frais la banque alimentaire. Ce qui est quand même, il faut le noter, en France, qui va à contre-courant du fonctionnement habituel, puisque la banque alimentaire, elle est alimentée par des canaux nationaux, d'approvisionnement nationaux, et elle ne passe pas d'habitude par l'approvisionnement local. Donc ça, c'est intéressant de se dire que là, il y a quelque chose qui s'est mis en place, qui peut-être va se pérenniser, on verra, mais en tout cas, qui permet une collaboration de plus entre voilà, les producteurs, l'action municipale et le soutien social dans ce cas-là. Donc voilà pour le deuxième exemple. Et ce qu'on peut souligner de façon un peu transversale, c'est que du fait de la bonne connaissance, enfin, l'interconnaissance entre l'équipe de la cuisine et notamment Hugues et les élus et les producteurs locaux, enfin les élus, surtout l'élu en charge de l'agriculture, monsieur Roxy, cette interconnaissance a fait que la capacité d'adaptation a pu être beaucoup plus vive et beaucoup plus efficace que si les liens n'avaient pas été créés et actifs avant. Puisque là, du coup, ils ont été tout à fait capables de s'appeler, de se dire, ben voilà, tel producteur est en difficulté, lui un peu moins, et du coup d'adapter la réponse de la municipalité et d'orienter les commandes vers tel ou tel producteur. Donc, il faut signaler l'interconnaissance voilà, entre eux, puisqu'ils sont capables de dire qui est en difficulté entre les producteurs, mais également entre les producteurs et l'acteur public. Donc là, il y a deux niveaux qui sont intéressants à souligner. Et pour terminer, on peut dire que donc c'est important que notre soutien voilà, se maintienne et se pérennise auprès des producteurs dans cette phase de transition qui est la fin de crise, enfin, le retour à la normale, du moins on l'espère, mais que ça coïncide pour nous aussi avec une baisse d'activité liée à la fermeture de fait des écoles, qui n'a rien à voir avec le confinement, mais avec les vacances estivales. Donc là, voilà, on va être un petit peu entre parenthèses pendant 2 mois et on verra dans quel sens on peut maintenir le lien avec eux. Mais en tout cas, là, on l'a fait pendant cette période de confinement, qui était quand même inédite et qui était un sacré défi à relever, mais qui l'a été par la cuisine centrale. Donc, on va le maintenir pendant l'été.
Try to start off without the video because we're having trouble earlier and hope. I won't be speaking for very long, but I am going to be handing over to our wonderful panelists. I would like to quickly introduce Stefania Amato, Kemi Akinola, and Anna Moragas-Fau. I think Kemi is having some trouble joining us. I hope she'll be able to join us soon. But first, I'd like to hand over to Stefania to just do a little bit of introduction to your work and reflections on some of what you've just seen from Oostende and from Avignon, to whether this is seen through your work. I should also see you as network manager the food systems work in C40. Stefania, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, I think you can hear. I hope you can hear me now.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so yes, for the one of you that don't know me, my name is Stefania Amato and I work for C40. I'm the C40 Food System Network Manager. C40 is a network of megacities, so 3 million plus inhabitants. We got 16 working groups, one of which is around food. And we have, in general, as an organization, a membership that is of 96 megacities, of which 55 now are part of the food systems network. So as you can imagine, it has been quite a period. These months have been very complex for everybody, CTOs in particular, and of course all of the cities that are participated, that are member of my network. They faced tremendous challenges during the outbreak. I just wanted to share with you one slide, which is this one. It's basically the first, the first image we got from Wuhan at the beginning, almost mid-March, and we received this image by our contacts there. They set up this widespread general food aid distribution system, and of course when this got to us, meaning us inside C40, but also to the other cities in the network, basically our legs were shaking. It was really unpredictable, complex to understand, difficult to see what would have happened in our cities if all of us should have done something similar, and it was scary. Of course, in a short while, we set up a number of channels between emergency channels to bring our cities in direct contact and try to figure out from where to start. I have to say that everything went kind of smoothly after the first 3 weeks of chaos. Then ideas were much clearer, and also the things that needed to be done, the tasks that needed to be accomplished by food teams around these cities were set and clear and running up high speed, basically. I have to say that from what I heard from Avignon, the line, I mean, the thinking is quite the same, and the things that happened are quite the same. We started from identifying 2 main chapters, big work streams. So first were vulnerables, second was the general shopping. So first, how to help the vulnerables. The second one, it has to avoid the chaos inside the cities. For what concerned the first bit of work, we identified 2 categories, mainly people that were really like locked down, couldn't leave home. So seniors, quarantine people, but also the usual vulnerables with difficulties in unable to move. And those were really at the core of all the actions built up by CTOs. And then in a broader circle, everybody that was kind of locked down, so with limited possibility to get out and do shopping and buy food, including the COVID unemployed and all the people that all of a sudden found themselves without income, so to buy their own food. So those were our 2 groups, 2 vulnerables group that we identified and we targeted as first beneficiaries, so to say. And then what cities have done is basically like food aid distribution system have been created all over, basically in all our cities. Sometimes they were complemented by sub kitchens or school feeding program repurposed to serve neighborhoods and families. Sometimes, of course, like there were different systems. Sometimes, I mean, the home delivery was, as you can imagine, the biggest burden for CTOs. We got different cities in the US, for instance, hiring unemployed taxi drivers to bring food at home for people. Some other time, there was a more sophisticated system with a lot of third parties and NGOs and all community organizations coming up to take this food from food hubs created ad hoc by cities and bring it to the door of the people. Whenever people were able to move, we had these other systems of soup kitchens and school feeding program repurposed, or other, I would say, more light touch kind of measure, such as the safe hours in supermarkets, just for the vulnerables, and things like that, which are, of course, as you can imagine, very different in terms of what implied for the work that the city had to provide. The other, last but not least, I think the vouchers mechanism, food voucher mechanism, was set in place in many cities. And the idea here was basically first to give people some money to allow them to choose the food they wanted, but also somehow bring money to food vendors, also informal vendors in some global south cities that were struggling with the lockdown to gain any money. So these were more or less the mechanism put in place for the vulnerables. And then for the general shopping, I have to say, the main idea was how to mitigate supermarket congestion. So it was a completely different task for CTOs, but still very important for the outcome where it brought us. It basically, all of cities end up pushing for diversification in shopping, which led a lot of people knowing and acknowledging the role of small stores, neighborhood stores. And this is in fact one of the two things we are working on now in this so-called recovery phase. So in this second phase, where we're basically asking ourselves what we can keep from what we learned. So definitely, like, this diversification piece is one of the potentially most generating one. And we're thinking a lot about that. And the other big piece is that, given that our scenarios are telling us that basically this food aid distribution mechanism will last other 12 to 18 months in many cities, we are now thinking, okay, now that the system is in place, let's try to consider again this food aid distribution system as procurement, and therefore try to apply all our values that we always try to align to, also for emergency food procurement. So it's just we're pushing for a mind shift on that food aid distribution mechanism, and we're looking for solution to keep positive parts of this whole thing also in the future. Not sure, Ben, if this is enough. I can pause here and then possibly, yeah.
Fine, yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Categorizing, I think a lot of people will have seen similarities between the categorization you've had and the approaches in their cities. My sound isn't particularly good. I had one quick question, Stefania, before we bring in the other panelists.
Yeah.
Those bags in your Wuhan slide, is that food that is going to waste, or is that actually food that's being supplied?
Yeah, that is food that has been supplied. So what the Chinese cities have done is that they created these so-called green channels. So everything was halted. I mean, no movements were allowed, but food and, of course, health as two main sectors. So what was happening is that countrysides were providing food, were bringing food to food hubs, which are quite in the outskirts of cities. And then the people you see there, that's a city hall employee. that was basically I don't know how to say it, that started doing this different job for the time being, which was basically to unload trucks and load public buses from the city of Wuhan to bring this food to the single, like they live in a kind of gated communities. I mean, it's small communities, and all of these communities were receiving food at their doors, and this was how the food was brought to them from the food hubs in the outskirts. Yeah.
And I would like to return shortly to your, I suppose, your categorization of the different approaches and some of those ideas on next steps. But first, I wanted to bring in Ana Moragues-Vau, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Barcelona and a Visiting Fellow at Sustainable Places Institute at Cardiff University. Anna, it'd be great to get your reflections. I know you've released a paper on this issue recently, on what you've seen in terms of some of the different approaches around feeding vulnerable people during COVID.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's a great pleasure to be here. So yes, I've been, well, as a researcher, I've been working in the last years a lot with cities across Europe on how to implement urban food strategies and how to work across different sectors and with different actors to build a more sustainable and just food system. So in order to kind of like continuing with my work under these times, I think through COVID, like many of us, I've been struggling to try to keep on top of what was happening as we were as well confined and struggling with that situation. So I've been trying to engage with the ongoing responses or the lack of some responses as well, collecting some information and putting my academic hat on, trying to reflect on what these experiences mean and trying to understand what we can learn from these extraordinary times. So for me, there are some lessons, I think. First of all is this collective turn, how the global pandemic has repositioned our priorities to value the essentials of life, like food, but also public services and also the community. So this connection between people and places and the environment is a key factor to understand how we feed ourselves, but how our lives are sustained farther than that, from our health to the health of the planet, but also how our neighbors help to feed us when a crisis like this strikes. So I think this interdependence is what they really expose, is that individualistic approaches are not really useful at all to address these challenges that we're facing at the planetary level. So I think there's a call for universal rights, like the right to food, but also collective responsibilities. And I think that one of the lessons that we're clearly on the same boat. So we will sing together, or we have to continue sailing together and try to do it in a way that we are able to not only feed ourselves, but have a healthy life, us and our children and grandchildren. So I think that's for me the first lesson. The second one, I think also the limits of what is possible have been blurred. And this is clearly exemplified by some of the measures that were taken at the beginning of the confinement and the pandemic. Here in Spain, there were mortgage repayments that were frozen. Also, the government took over private hospitals if needed. So all these things that couldn't be done under the current paradigm, it wasn't feasible economically, socially, and so on. Well, we know that's not true anymore. So maybe it was a momentary thing, but maybe not. So we cannot say anymore, this cannot be done. So I think when we think about policies and actions, we have to take this into account, this big lesson. Another thing that I think has happened as well with when the crisis hit is that mostly at the national, international levels, there were many policies that were implemented that they had this still monolithic understanding of what the food system is and how we grow food and how we consume food and where do we buy it. So there was a lot of emphasis on supermarkets feeding us, but we have, and in that kind of like in that line of action, we have seen some very surprising and very disappointing moves by some governments. Here in Spain, many open air markets were closed down. People weren't allowed to access growing spaces. There was a failure to protect food workers, like in many other places. And also they were shutting down of the schools with not really a plan to deliver solutions to children that needed these school meals. So it was, I think still this shows that we don't really understand like all the diversity and all the things that the food system does for us every day, and that we need to take into account in a situation like this. So at the same time, when we were seeing this type of measures, there were so many initiatives and innovations that were coming up, so much diversity and active engagement. Some of the examples that Stefania was saying, but also the examples of Oostende and Avignon, in terms of trying to build these localized, these community food economies to be able to feed people, to feed our citizens. So we can see how there's much more diversity and much more capacity to redistribute things and to share these societal material benefits through the food system. And for me, one of the key things is how we are creating or we are mobilizing different infrastructure that the city has in order to provide this food. And we have social infrastructure in terms of our connections, how we reconnect to different stakeholders. And we could see this in the examples of Oostende and Avignon, of how suddenly there's no food waste or food that can be taken from supermarkets. So how you have to reconfigure that and create new connections, but also physical infrastructure like this central kitchen and how important that was to connect different people and to actually serve food to people that need it. And I think also we all experienced this digital revolution of like from WhatsApp groups to Telegram to so many other ways of actually reconnecting ourselves and helping others that were near us. So I think that has been very refreshing, and we have seen the potential there of doing things in a different way and rebuilding the food system in a way that can deliver social, economic, and environmental benefits as well. So for me, I think finally this is the part that is very important, that we need to create this infrastructure. Sometimes we need to protect it, but sometimes we need to create it, because the system is not resilient or regenerative per se. We have to build it. We have to build that type of resilient capacity. So we have to champion this form of like being able to reconnect, to quickly adapt, to be flexible, to being able to identify who needs what, and how, for example, in the kitchen Avignon, they were reconnecting to local producers. Well, creating this infrastructure is not a given. There's going to be a lot of funds to be channeled through trying to regenerate Europe after this. And I think one of the lessons is this, no? How we put our lens of sustainable food through this in order to have a system, have a food system that nurture our future in a way that is sustainable, and that we could have like more livable lives, really. I don't know, Ben, if that's if you wanted me to continue a bit more with the initiative. So that's
great, thank you, Anna. It'd be really good to get your thoughts feeding in as we sort of start thinking about what there needs to be, what needs to change, as you sort of just touched upon that. But first, I wanted to bring in Kemi, who has just joined us. Kemi, hello. So just to do a quick introduction. So Kemi Akinola is the CEO, MD of Be Enriched and Brixton People's Kitchen, and also chair of the Wandsworth Food Partnership and Lambeth Food Partnership as well, involved in that. Kemi, hi. Wondering if you can say a little bit about some of your work in responding to this crisis, and I appreciate you've been involved with a few different hats, both in terms of frontline provision and the community response, also in some of these sort of policy discussions and part of these sort of city or borough food approach. Yeah, so it'd be great if you can tell a bit about some of your experiences.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Absolutely fine.
Yes, for sure. It's okay. Go on.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm currently still right now I am at the emergency food hub in Lambeth. I've just asked everyone to move away from the door because they are having too much fun. It's one of the few times that we're actually allowed to gather as group, although 2 meters apart, or I think as of a couple of minutes ago, 1 meter apart from each other. You know, everyone, it's kind of, they're feeling very celebratory to be able to be together where they can't normally. That's my job as, or my role as Lambeth Food Partnership Chair has basically been supporting Lambeth Council in setting up the inner city equivalent of a food hub. What that means is, I mean, we don't grow a lot of things inside of a city, so we had to set up agreements with farmers and producers and suppliers from outside of London to import things. Price of food actually went up quite a bit. I'm sure there are a lot of other factors related to why the price of fresh food has gone up quite a bit, but also it's quite expensive anyway in everyday times even for people in London. So what we actually have is we've been sending out boxes of around 20 bits of fruit and veg, and the result of that is people have come back to us and said they've never eaten as well normally. Normally they can't afford it. I'm sure we're all aware that the in the food plate, the cost of a food plate is actually more than the income for most people. So here we send out about 400, or we have been sending out about 400 crates every week of fresh food, dry goods, and some supplies like cleaning equipment. And actually right now it's all coming to a close. So the noise, if you can hear noise around me, these are all the boxes of things being flat packed, recycled, put away. It's all coming to an end. I will say no more on that for the minute. And then in my other hat, actually my other hat in Wandsworth, where I also facilitate the Wandsworth Food Partnership there. Our role has really been more around bringing the groups of people together, the producers, the voluntary sector, which has been relied on quite heavily, together to support each other to provide food for the community. There's been less involvement by the council in Wandsworth, but they have provided some food. My role there, also I'm a councillor. In fact, yesterday I was elected deputy leader of the Labour Party, which was quite exciting. I'm hoping that as we move forward, I'm able to influence more support and infrastructure for the voluntary sector, which has been lacking. And I think there's something to be said really about not putting the work and the effort in before and then expecting the voluntary sector to deliver subsequently. I think that really had to be there before in order for those, for you just to be strengthening bonds as opposed to creating and making them. I think the other thing I do, I think that's all my COVID response really for the minute.
Thank you, Kemi. It sounds like it's really busy where you are, and it would be really good, I think, to touch again in a second. You said that you're wrapping up the service in Lambeth. Is that because it's no longer needed, or is it something more political? Is that some share? You left us on a cliffhanger.
Sorry. Hi. No, it's because the way that the service actually operated was people called a phone line, and which managed by the council in Lambeth. They called a phone line, and then food was sent out to them. So lots of referrals in that sort of way. But I think as time has gone on, people have found different ways to get food. Bearing in mind that we were imposing upon them boxes of food that might be things that they're not used to, or things that they wouldn't normally buy. And I think in some cases, things that they don't really know how to cook. I've been able to, as the shops have opened and people have stopped stockpiling everything, people have more access to food. They've now been able to buy things that they want to eat. And honestly, I think choice is super important. So there was 2 sites open in Lambeth. One was both in sports centres. One was in the Brixton Rec, which is a very big multi-storey sports centre, and one which is one that I was using, which was 2 basketball courts that we utilised. We we utilize as the food hub instead. So ours, the smaller one, is closing, but what we're actually doing with the idea of choice in mind is converting one it's a reasonably sized cafe into a community shop so that people can come and buy what they need. We're hoping to maintain those relationships built with producers to get smaller quantities, but still quantities of fresh fruit and veg, hopefully at the same sort of price. That's still up for discussion.
Thanks, Kemi. I wanted to, I suppose, throw this net to all three panelists, and before we bring back the speakers from Avignon and Oostende. But I was just wondering what your thoughts are on, in terms of you feel now needs to happen. How do we make these cities and municipalities, how can we provide further support for these vulnerable groups as lockdown measures are lifted, and these cities and municipalities more resilient and better prepared for? I think all of you have touched upon these issues, but I just wondered if we could get some more reflections on that. I don't know, Anya, go first. We haven't heard from you before.
Yeah, okay. Right, so I would say that the work we've been doing within a network, kind of, we opened a little bit of a phase of a brainstorm with all of the cities to understand, to understand a bit how to approach the recovery phase and potentially a new wave. So I have to say that while cities feel a little bit more comfortable now after this first wave experience, they feel they kind of handle well the emergency, and they're still fine-tuning some parts of the response measures, but they feel okay. To give you an example, some of them are working on consolidating the databases for these vulnerables. Some are already thinking about which would then be the best use of those data in the future. Like let's call it a COVID-free future, meaning if the same database that we are creating right now can then be potentially the base for a social protection program, let's say in an African city, where those data are very important. They kind of force all of a sudden to collect those data. They were talked about collecting those data for years, and then now all of a sudden they've got those data. So the way of thinking is like, well, we are fine-tuning the database right now, and we're already thinking about how we could potentially use those data in a COVID-free, in potentially very near COVID-free future. So that's one way of thinking, and it goes on different things. It goes in the same way for home growing. Home growing, I mean, like growing in informal settlements without land, or in many different things that were touched, kind of built up very quickly during the emergency. Now that the approach is like, let's see how to fine-tune this for the second wave, and then turn it to something permanent, if positive, for the COVID-free future. And that's one thing. Then on the other side, what we're doing is like, we open this brainstorming with them, trying to see trying to understand which was the best way to approach the recovery phase. And there we realized that given the projection, so first of all, the food aid distribution system would have remained in place for the next 12 to 18 months. So to start treating this procurement as normal procurement, meaning looking at the quality of the food, looking at the at the origins of the food, and all of that. So it's really like it's really like trying to kind of leave the panic for a second and think a little bit strategically around that. And I have to say, it does make sense. A lot of money are now put into that, and a lot of money will be put in the next months. So it does make sense to try to apply our usual principles to emergency food procurement as well. And then the second bit is about economic recovery. So the recovery of the food economic of the food businesses more in general. So being them local producers that have been hit by the lockdown and the crisis, or the hospitality sector, throughout the whole chain. And now, again, the effort, which is very difficult right now, but is try to look into what that means. Why? Not to downplay the tools we have. We have some tools now. Money are coming for businesses, so we need to make sure to attach some caveats to those money, to those support, some requirement to those support, some criteria. We know that all businesses would need and will need support, but in order for them to get support, we have the chance to say something. We have the chance to sneak in some bits of our vision into that. We're not giving, to give you a very easy example, we're not going to do what I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll talk free, then you can write me. We're not going to be doing what the US government has done right now for the hospitality sector. So bringing money, like giving money to everybody, and then in the end realizing that the 70% of the money that was given to the hospitality sector is going to restaurant chains serving shitty food and a disaster, and leaving all the ones that were supposed to get those money alone, up to the fact that now almost like 30% of the small neighborhood restaurants in all US cities are closing. And this is a data that we need to keep in mind, because this is happening all over. So a lot of the the most visible, the most livable restaurants that are, like part of our identities, our neighbors' identities, those will be closed. Family restaurants will be closed. And 30% of them. So this is a big problem. So whatever support will be given by the public, by the cities or the government, can be attached to some conditionalities. It can be attached. It needs to be attached. We could also, we've seen a lot of things like all of the cities are allowing now restaurants, but also a small shop to extend outdoor to allow for social distancing. Let's try to attach those extensions, those permissions to, let's say the quality, some specific foods that they can serve, some specific message that they can give. Like some free options for vulnerables. So, we've got tons of ideas, and everybody here has got tons of ideas, but just it's a matter of pushing now, because now it's the time to say, yes, public money but comes with some conditions. It's not everything. Yeah, I can stop here.
No, I think it's a really great for us to think about. It's about policies, it's about next steps. And we have many policymakers on the call, many from cities. I think it's sort of really thinking, I want to hear about some good examples where people have done this elsewhere. I think we're going to use that about having a green strings or healthy strings attached to that money, that support. And one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about from some European countries is the idea of you're not going to get a bailout if you're not paying tax, and that's something I think we would love to happen more with some of the things from the UK context. Your question on the hospitality, one of the things that I think one of the ideas that I've heard about is the idea at a local level, at a city level, that one might be able to do business rate reduction for some of those. And obviously from the city level, you could focused in on some of those smaller family-run businesses. Potentially those business rates reductions come with strings attached, and the idea being needs to be part of those local healthier catering initiatives. Every country, every city has those different versions of those, but you can only get that if you're part of this. And so it'd be great to hear from some more examples around that. Kemi and Anna, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that thing of how to support businesses bouncing back, or the and what sort of businesses, but also what Stefania was saying around the importance of better understanding. I mean, Stefania was talking about having a database of vulnerable groups. I think we'll have a database of those people who are vulnerable in different forms. And I think what has come through a lot of the presentation so far is the importance of those local networks who really know who those people are. They know what street they live on, know people who know how to reach them. And it seems like that's becoming a part of certain things you've spoken about. And I don't know, Anna, if that's something you see as being a real need or focus of what.
Yeah, I think what Stefania was saying really resonates with some of the things that I've been seeing, also discussing with colleagues in different cities. I think one of the important things for me, and I think that the COVID brings to light, is that in terms of food, we are all vulnerable in different ways. So we can think about vulnerable groups in terms of like the people that are having difficulty to access food in a short-term basis, in an emergency basis, but we can also think about producers not being able to make a living because they cannot sell their produce anymore to the food service, and therefore they are starting to fall into that trap. So I think thinking in this systemic way, this integral way about the food system is very important to think about vulnerability, and it links very well to that idea that we need to attach some strings to how are we going to do the recovery. We cannot think anymore about short-term thinking, emergency thinking, feeding with cheap calories. We need to go beyond that because we know that this is not a single crisis, that there are other crises that are very linked to our food system right now, and that we need to build in that sustainability and that resilience. So we have to have environmental issues there. We have to have social issues there about building community, about properly rewarding people that live from the food chain, from the food workers all along the food chain as well, which we have seen that are very exposed in these COVID conditions as well. So I think there's a need to say, well, we cannot have this criteria of like, we just need the cheapest way possible so that the public sector spends as little as possible in order to have like a short-term solution. I think we really need to work through that. And there are many unsung heroes, I think, in this crisis that have been working within municipalities, making sure that there was fresh fruit and veg within those boxes, within those. I know from cities here in Spain that they have been pushing very hard to make sure that people were eating proper food during this crisis, that kids were eating proper food. And I think that's a very, very big need of continuing that lobbying and training, because we have seen how in some places they have resorted to the cheap, quick option. In Madrid, they were feeding pizzas to school children from a fast food company. So that's kind of like the quick fix, and we still need to do a lot of pressure to push, like to show that that's not getting us anywhere, and that we need to really invest in regenerating the food system to regenerate our societies after this terrible crisis.
Ken, I could bring you in with any thoughts on that, what is needed in the future.
Well, yes, I think what struck me really during this whole period was in terms of businesses being able to bounce back, the people that had the worst time were the stallholders of in covered markets, because actually the market was the organization that has the business rates, and each individual stallholder was therefore not eligible for support. So those are the people that I've been supporting the most to kind of bounce back. And I think they actually opened a couple of weeks ago, which is good for them, because also it's helping people to buy local. I would really love it if no one ever bought from a supermarket again. That would make me really happy, because we really should be supporting our local businesses, which, as we discovered, have better supply chains than the supermarkets. So, and the other thing about data, so although the councils had set up a phone line, we took it upon ourselves, being Rich Boots in People's Kitchen, took it upon ourselves to set up our own phone line, because we realised that some people would not want to call the council for the exact reason that they don't want their information to be used in any way. So I think most people were supported by the voluntary sector, who aren't going to potentially use your information to deport you, or evictions even. So because a lot of the people that we have spoken to are people with no recourse to public funds, and some who do not have a right to remain, but they are people nevertheless and still deserve to eat. I think that the category of who is vulnerable has changed somewhat as well over the whole COVID period, because it is not just typically vulnerable people with ill health or elderly. There are also people who have been unable to buy anything from the shop because they've lost their jobs, don't have any money, or unable to buy anything from the shop because there isn't anything in the shop to buy. So I think that in the future, how can we support these people? I'm not really entirely sure how we can prevent these things from happening in the future, but being aware of it and having gone through it now should give us some lessons to learn from. That's the hope.
And I mean, you raised the point about food prices going up. I just wondered if we could bring in some of the other, Ewoud from Oostende, because I know you're still on the line. Something you've seen and how you've had to sort of deal with that in terms of your response.
Maybe about the data. Like here in Oostende, I think, and also in other cities, I think social services, they have a lot of data. Like, for example, we with the social grocery, but also lots of food charity organizations, they, in the start of COVID, they started to call all the existing customers. So we called everybody we know who comes before to the social grocery. So the data we had. But I'm agreed with Kemi. That's, I think it's important to really collaborate and have a good, I think you have to think about how you can support on a good way the volunteer organizations, because here in Oostende, but I saw the same thing in Ghent, lots of professional social services closed because of the measures of insurances and those things, and like volunteer organizations stayed opened. It was the volunteer organizations who did the food supply and all those things. So I think how we can give them all the good information, how we can support them by giving them good food, by a good logistic system. That's the way we worked here in Oostende, really supporting those volunteer organizations. And also we had one emergency call number, so people who had needs about everything, they could call one phone number, and the phone number, they linked the people to food charity or to bring groceries. So yeah, that was a bit,
okay. We're pretty close to needing to wrap up, so I'm going to thank all speakers, panelists, and hand over to Dirk Vascher, who's I think is going to do a bit of a sum up from what this means from a FoodSHIFT point of view. And I think one of the things that has really come through for me is the importance of having those networks, having those partnerships in place in order to respond when you look to other parts, other cities which don't have those partnerships, don't have those networks. whether they've been able to respond as quickly and as well to this crisis in being able to reach out to those most vulnerable groups. Just if you wanted to wrap up.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Ben, and thank you all panelists and presenters. From the FoodSHIFT 2030 point of view, that's definitely a rich harvest, I would say. I mean, there were a couple of things which I think we are happy to pick up along. For example, that the time where producers and food networks, urban food networks, are meeting and are getting into a new sense of, let's say, cooperation or personal interaction, I think is something to eventually formalize, which sounds, of course, less ad hoc and spontaneous, but that's a character with everything you want to just basically hold on to. Nevertheless, I can see to make this more a part of the whole food system approach to establish these interactions with creativity and with, basically social media involvement, making use of what has been said of the digital revolution, which reached elements of the food system that includes the minorities, that includes vulnerable groups as well. So that's certainly something where also we are equipped to at FoodSHIFT to do something about. Furthermore, I thought that the redefinition of vulnerable groups is something to take on board, because it's indeed not just those in immediate need for having quality food or to be fed at all, but these are the groups which are vulnerable to the COVID-19, which live in certain fragile, vulnerable areas, which can be detected, which can be identified. I mentioned in an earlier talk that we now know that in areas of livestock density, these respiratory diseases are quite big. So I can see to identify these areas and to see which vulnerable groups we are actually facing. Also because I think the COVID-19 is not really gone. It's just taking a pause, and hopefully a long pause, or maybe for good, but we have to be prepared for further negative interventions. And I also thought this first picture we saw on the Wuhan example of the transport, the green channels, I found very inspiring to look into this matter of finding more fair distribution of food that is regionally produced, and to overcome this hamster buying, and to make sure that food waste is really not only going to the vulnerable, but is really being systematically used, leftovers, remains, to be part of the whole food system supply network. And so these were my observations. Alongside, there are, I think, many more, which we will probably capture in the next hour or two, and feed back into the network and into the participants' channels. Thank you for now.
Dominique, you're muted.
I can't hear you. Are we online?
Sorry, yes. So I want to thank you very much, Dirk, as well as our panelists, Stefania, Anna, and Kemi, as well as our participants to the consortium, so Ewoud and Hugues and Elsa, who took time to record their experience for this webinar, and we were very thankful for that. So I want as well to inform all participants that our project is about as well creating the shift, and to link with to link up with other cities. We have these 9 cities that are already participating, but in the coming months we will invite 27 more cities to join our project. So if you are passionate foodies and if you want to be part of this project, just write to this email foodshift2030@ku.dk, and for following us, that are our details on the web, so that you can keep contact with us. And we are very thankful for you to have been joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Thank you all.
Bye.